Ladies and gentlemen, could I ask your attention, please? Because it's time to get started, may I ask to take your seats, please? Please be seated. Could you please close the door, back door over there? Thank you. All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Korean Association for Public Diplomacy, I really would like to thank you for joining us this morning for the inaugural conference of the Korean Association for Public Diplomacy, which is based on the subject of Korean public diplomacy, the past and the future 10 years. We actually, despite the unabating coronavirus 19 crisis, we gathered together to celebrate and also take part in the inaugural conference of the KPSA. Not only, but we gathered here with some, maintaining some distance, as well as on online. Yeah, both the entire conference is being streamlined today. But then, in a sense, I think the distance communication is these days already a prominent feature of public diplomacy in this century. But situations were quite radically different in the past. For example, in over half a century ago, in 1960s, you probably well know of Mr. Edward Murrow, who is the renowned American journalist who served also as the director of the United States Information Agency, and who is also, I will say that, an intellectual pioneer in the field of public diplomacy. He actually emphasizes the importance of quote unquote the last 3 feet, approximately like a 1 meter distance between person and person. Okay, what does that mean? He actually emphasizes he emphasizes the importance of interpersonal, face-to-face contact. I mean, particularly in international exchange and public diplomacy. Okay, the last 3 feet between person and person, between people, must be bridged by face-to-face contact. That was what he said in the late 1960s, more than over a century ago. But today, I am really tempted to revise Edward Murrow by turning him upside down, okay, by saying that, actually, distance communication today is taking the place of the last 3 feet, okay, and has become as the prevalent, the dominant mode of communication in international exchange and public diplomacy. That said, however, but nevertheless, if we really have to, really compelled to make a last 3 feet communication, interpersonal communication today, then please read my lips. Please don't forget to wear a facial mask. That's, I think, is very important these days. Okay, without much ado, I would like to get started by introducing the first president of Korea Association Public Diplomacy, President Cho Gi-soo, the professor of Ewha Women's University, who also served as in the Roh Moo-hyun government, senior secretary to the president of public information So, ladies and gentlemen, why don't you join me warmly welcoming President and Professor Jo Gi-suk to the podium for her welcoming remarks. President Jo, please.
Members of the Korean Association for Public Diplomacy who join us via YouTube Live, greetings to you all. It is a great honor and privilege to host this academic conference today to celebrate the foundation of the Kapd. In particular, we'd like to extend our deepest gratitude to His Excellency Lee Tae-ho, Second Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, who will give a welcoming speech today, and Representative Lee Sang-min and Park Jin of the National Assembly of Korea, who took their time out of busy schedule to congratulate us. His Excellency Mikhail Reiterer, Ambassador of the European Union to the Republic of Korea, and Mr. Lee Geun, President of Korea Foundation, and Mr. Hwang Kun, Minister Counselor for Political Affairs at the Embassy of the People's Republic of China in South Korea. I would like to express sincere appreciation to our speakers of the opening ceremony and panelists and participants for the afternoon sessions. And I also invited Mr. Han Chung-hee, former Director General of the Cultural Affairs Bureau in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as our special guest, because he was the one who sowed the seeds for the birth of this organization. He persistently persuaded me to establish the Public Diplomacy Center, which is Korea's first public diplomacy research organization at Ewha Women's University. The center's activities and achievements encouraged our members to persuade me to lead the establishment of the Kapd and to become its inaugural president. Mr. Han, thank you. The need for this organization was voluntarily raised by our members from the bottom up. To establish our organization, 26 members undertook preparations for 6 months. Moreover, senior professors like Professor Shin Ho-chang and Professor Lee Byung-jong, who already served as the presidents of diverse academic societies, eagerly accepted my invitation to serve as board of members. And they did so out of sense of responsibility that they must pave the way for younger academics before it was too late, as public diplomacy is bound to become a highly important area in the future. Thanks to such commitment, members of the preparation committee and I were able to experience a sense of great excitement. Until fairly recently, diplomacy had been an area of policy that received the least public attention. That's why it remained the only area of bipartisanship, as we have two National Assemblymen here, and they are fighting all the time, but for diplomacy, we maintained bipartisanship. For this very reason, public diplomacy had been considered a mere subfield of diplomacy, just like political and economic diplomacy. However, PD transcends all these. As a matter of fact, it signifies a great paradigm shift in diplomacy. Moving forward, whether it be economics, politics, or culture, there will be no area free from public attention, because we are now living in a world where even diplomatic activities of the state of the head are broadcast live and shared by people around the globe. So I strongly believe that the re-emergence of public diplomacy in the 21st century is a product born entirely out of democratization, globalization, and technological development in communications. Democratization, on the one hand, has allowed the once indifferent and helpless public to participate more actively in political processes while raising their voices. And globalization, on the other hand, has rendered the distinction between domestic and international affairs meaningless. It was in this light that our inaugural General Assembly came to be held on the 33rd anniversary of the June 10th democratic uprising, under the belief that a healthy democracy is the foundation of successful public diplomacy. And diplomats can no longer be solely engaged in negotiation with their foreign counterparts. Now they must be expert communicators who can share and exchange ideas with the public overseas. The government alone cannot make public diplomacy a success. It requires concerted efforts by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, each governmental department, civil society, businesses, and the public. So in addition to accumulating systematic knowledge and theories of public diplomacy, we at the KPD hope to help resolve conflicts among the central and municipal governments and their overlapping responsibilities. At the same time, we aim to share our knowledge and expertise so that our government and civil society can establish a more effective and efficient governance structure for PD. Now, with the establishment of our organization, truly interdisciplinary research has become possible among experts in diverse fields, including political science, public relations, journalism, policy science, Korean language and literature, cultural studies, and so on. We will also open a space where lecturers can share pedagogy and teaching materials on PD for educating future generations. And this task has been promoted by Korea Foundation for recent years. And today, in celebration of KPD's foundation, we are hosting an academic conference under the theme of Korean public diplomacy, the past and future 10 years. By reviewing Korea's past efforts in public diplomacy, we would like to discuss how public diplomacy must develop as an academic field in the future. While saving cultural diplomacy one of the most interesting and hottest topics these days, for future discussion, we seek to explore new horizons for knowledge and policy diplomacy and digital diplomacy today. Finally, we have also arranged a venue for discussion where currently active public diplomats can learn about future demands and strategies to survive in the age of artificial intelligence and the new normal. I'd like to express my respect and gratitude to all the researchers, diplomats, and working level professionals who are spearheading the new field with a pioneering spirit. We hope that today's academic conference can serve as a moment of comfort and cheer to those who had to walk this lonely and winding path as trailblazers. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, President Cho Gi-suk. Well, actually, I would say that the association has been under cooking for years. So without some collective intellectual endeavor, I would say that it would have been impossible to give a birth to Korean Association for Public Diplomacy today. But particularly focusing on past couple months, I would like to invite Dr. Kim Hwa-jung, Dr. Kim Hwa-jung, who is currently Director of General Affairs of the KAPD, to provide a briefing on progress report of the association. Please, Dr. Kim.
Yes, thank you. It's such an honor to make this very first and memorable progress report on behalf of the executive members at the Korean Association for Public Diplomacy. Although I'm still considering myself as a toddler or maybe a beginner in this field, but if I may, I can say the process was fast forward. It was beyond our expectation. It was on time, exactly within budget, thanks to all the executive members' time and efforts, and as well as our hardworking staffs. And most importantly, we had such wonderful and excellent leadership done by President Ki-suk-cho. From now, I'd like to give a brief report on the progress. A preparatory committee was formed at the founding conference held at Ewha University early this year on February 14th. Professor Ki-suk-cho was appointed as the chairman of the committee by 17 founding members. Since then, there have been 4 committee meetings held virtually to establish a new association and to organize inaugural conference. At the founding General Assembly of the KAPD on June 10th, Professor Ho Chang-shin facilitated a meeting as an interim president, and 51 members were in attendance virtually. During the assembly, Professor Ki-suk-cho was elected as the first president of the KAPD, and executive committees were established. As of now, the total number of registered members is 144. Finally, the association received permission on June 23rd from the Seoul Metropolitan Government to establish a non-profit organization. Today's inaugural conference is sponsored by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the association is very much looking forward to future collaborations with the ministry. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kim. It's, very clear and crispy. Now, I feel that we are dangerously coming close to the main highlight of the keynote session. We have distinguished people gathered here to celebrate the launching of the association. And first, we have a very valuable person to open the highlight, who is the Honorable Ambassador Lee Tae-ho, who is Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs. Would you please join me in welcoming him with big hand? Thank you. Well, actually, prior to his appointment at this position, Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs in September 2018, he served as Deputy Minister for Economic Affairs in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and also subsequently as a Secretary to the President for Trade Affairs. Ambassador, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your warm introduction. Dr. Cho Ki-suk, President of the Korean Association for Public Diplomacy, the Honorable Lee Sang-min, Member of the National Assembly, the Honorable Park Jin, Member of the National Assembly, Your Excellency Michael Reiter, Ambassador of the European Union, Dr. Lee Geun, President of the Korea Foundation, members of the Korean Association for Public Diplomacy, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to be here today on this meaningful occasion of the very first conference of the Korean Association for Public Diplomacy, KAPD. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs is pleased to sponsor the inaugural conference, and on behalf of my ministry, I extend a warm welcome to all participants who are present here online as well as offline. The launch of the KAPD is encouraging because it not only reflects the Korean public's growing interest in public diplomacy, but also embodies the resolves of scholars and practitioners to pursue and lead the idea. As is the case for today's conference, the KAPD will open a new venue to help deepen our shared understanding of what public diplomacy is all about. Over the past 10 years, public diplomacy has been one of the major diplomatic priorities of the Korean government. Acknowledging the growing importance of public diplomacy, the government has worked very hard to promote various contents of Korea's soft power, which can be broadly categorized into culture, knowledge, and policy. To effectively deliver these contents, the Korean government has built and expanded the infrastructure for public diplomacy. The organization, personnel, and budget for public diplomacy continued to be on the rise. Among other things, the Public Diplomacy Act, enacted in 2016, provided the government with a solid legal foundation. Without support from the National Assembly, the legislation of this act would have been impossible. The Interagency Public Diplomacy Committee, chaired by the Foreign Minister under this law, played an essential role in coordinating various public diplomacy projects conducted by the central and local governments. And 10 years later, we stand at an unprecedented level. The Korean diplomacy has gone through a sea change in its approach in managing foreign relations. We are now witnessing the outcome of the Korean government's steady efforts to widen its perspective and employ creative means to reach out to foreign public. Even at this moment, Korea's soft power is being further elevated. However, we have just started on this journey. We needed to think hard to explore new ways and means which will help effectively conduct our public diplomacy. As we reflect on the question of the future direction of the public diplomacy, of course, we cannot ignore the impact of COVID-19 because the changes brought by COVID-19 are likely to remain with us for a while. It is for sure that the new normal before us will remain relevant, therefore, to the next 10 years of the public diplomacy. First of all, in this typical time of health crisis, where social distancing has become a new norm of our daily life, we see an opportunity to accelerate our path towards digital public diplomacy. We are pioneering creative ways on digital platforms to reach out to and communicate with the foreign public faster, wider, and more often, while providing substantive and tailored contents. Second, the universal impact of COVID-19 highlighted the importance of sharing and solidarity among members of the international community. Korea wishes to reinforce those key values through public diplomacy. Korea is open to sharing its best practices, information, and lessons learned on various global agenda. Such openness and transparency could be developed into the strengths of Korea's soft power as a country making a difference in a variety of multilateral agenda. Third, Korea's capacity for public diplomacy will greatly benefit from the participation of people under the new environment. Winning the hearts and minds cannot be done by the government alone. The Korean government will aim towards creating and opening more channels to engage Korean public and thereby strengthening the public-private partnership to reach out to foreign public. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, I would like to reiterate that the launch of Kapd is very opportune at this time when we are trying to shape the future of Korea's public diplomacy. My ministry has long been in search of partners in the pursuit of this new path of public diplomacy. Today, we found one, a good and reliable one. In fact, it found not only a reliable partner, but also an active advocate. No doubt, the Kapd will provide expertise, analysis, and perspectives on Korea's public diplomacy. Further, the association will lay out an open floor for the government and people to share opinions and help garner more support for Korea's public diplomacy. In closing, I hope that today's discussion will add new insights and strategies to the efforts we are making together as Team Korea to draw one step closer to advancing charming Korea, communicating with the world together with the public. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vice Minister Lee Tae. Thank you. Well, you just heard from I would say, the official authority of public diplomacy policy in Korea, because you know, Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs is in charge of, among many others, many very important diplomatic issues, which of course include public diplomacy. And given his remarks, I personally believe that he has high expectation of the Korea Association for Public Diplomacy. Am I correct, Vice Minister? Thank you very much. Okay, now we are moving over to congratulatory remarks. We have 6 distinguished people here. Once again, on behalf of Kapd, a deep appreciation for them to be here. First, I would like to invite to the podium the Honorable National Assemblyman Lee Sang-min. Why don't you please join me warmly welcoming him to the podium with big hand. Thank you.
저는 영어보다 한국어를 더 잘하기 때문에 한국어로 말씀드리겠습니다. 예, 안녕하십니까. 더불어민주당 국회의원 이상민입니다. 우선 한국공공외교학회 창립을 축하드리고 또 이와 함께 이를 기념하기 위한 학술대회 축하드립니다. 이를 위해서 애쓰신 조기숙 회장님을 비롯한 많은 여러분들 노고 많으셨습니다. 공공외교의 중요성은 제가 더 이상 강조 말씀 안 드려도 그 역할은 막중합니다. 더구나 앞으로는 더욱더 그럴 것으로 생각됩니다. 특히 이제 우리는 코로나19와 같은 그 미중위의 인류를 위협하는 그 위기를 극복을 함께 해야 되고 또 4차 산업혁명과 같은 인류 문명을 함께 개척해 나가야 하는 때입니다. 그런 때이니만큼 더욱더 국제적 연대와 협력이 요구되는 시기입니다. 그래서 더욱더 공공외교의 역할이 막중하다고 생각됩니다. 특히 한국은 중견국가로서 그 위상을 더 높이는 것은 물론이고 인류적 일원으로서 해야 될 책무로서 공공외교에 있어서 그 선도적 역할이 매우 요구되고 기대되는 바가 크다고 생각됩니다. 이러한 때에 한국 공공외교가 더욱 확장되고 심화되도록 다양한 분야를 협업하고 융합시킬 수 있게끔 학문적으로 이렇게 잘 협업하시고 또 이와 함께 실천적 방향성도 제시해 주시기 위해서 한국공공외교학회가 창립된 것은 매우 뜻깊고 또 기대되는 바가 매우 크다고 생각됩니다. 저는 국회 외교통상위원회 위원입니다. 여기 계시는 우리 박진 선배님은 전문가시지만 저는 그 미래통합당 의원들만 강제 배정받은 게 아니라 저도 강제 배정을 받아서 외교통상위원회에 와서 국회 외교통상위원회의 새내기입니다. 그런 만큼 열심히 공부하겠습니다만 우리 한국공공외교학회가 뜻하신 바 더욱 그 발전하시고 실현해 나가실 수 있도록 저도 국회에서 응원하고 열심히 박진 우리 선배님과 함께 지원하도록 하겠습니다. 다시 한번 한국공공외교학회를 창립을 축하드리고 또 여기 계신 모든 분들 건강과 행운을 빕니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you very much, National Assemblyman Lee Sang-min. He actually is a 5-time member of the Korean National Assembly, which means that he has served the Korean National Assembly since 2004. Can you believe it? That's 2004. It's his, I believe, vocation, profession, and currently he is a member, together with Honorable National Assemblyman Park Jin. He is currently a member of the Standing Committee of Foreign Affairs and Unification at National Assembly. Well, actually, he made a 3 point. The first point is that he cannot emphasize too much the importance of the role of public diplomacy, particularly when global society, solidarity in global society, and cooperation is much needed to overcome the confronting common crisis like corona crisis, and also collaboratively advance human civilization that include renovation and the fourth industrial revolution. So the role of public diplomacy is the importance of the role of public diplomacy cannot be overemphasized. And in that particular context, the role of Korea as a pivotal, as a leading middle power is highly, expected, not only from Korean people, but also from entire world. Second point is, in this context, he would like to assign a very, in-depth meanings to the launch of Korea Association for Public Diplomacy, because he has firm belief that the association will lead not only in the field of diplomatic practice, but also in the field of academic subdiscipline. Finally, but I think this point is very important for the association, he again, once again, on behalf of the Foreign Affairs National Unification Committee of the Korean National Assembly, he congratulates the launching of association, and he would like to use this opportunity to assure that he will be firmly committed to supporting the Korean Association for Public Diplomacy. Big hand, please. All right, thank you very much. Next, we have the Honorable National Assemblyman, Dr. Park Jin, actually from the United Future Party. He's also 4-time National Assemblyman, and we all know that he actually has made a brilliant comeback last general elections in the 21st Korean National Assembly. He has been, I would say that he has been a staunch, supporter of Korean diplomacy in general and Korean public diplomacy in particular. Please, Dr. Park Jin, please, would you please step toward to the podium? Please give him a big hand.
네. 저도 한국어를 더 잘하는데.
No, please do it in English. I mean, your English is much better than Korean.
네, 여러분 반갑습니다. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and President Cho Gi-suk, and distinguished guests, and my good colleague, National Assemblyman Lee Sang-min, and Vice Minister Lee Tae-ho, and Ambassador Reiter from European Union. And I see many familiar faces this morning. It is my great honor to attend this great conference to launch the Public Diplomacy Association, Korea Association for Public Diplomacy. I think it's very timely and really very meaningful, because I believe that Korea has now come to a stage where we need to communicate more deeply and widely with the world outside. Korea has gone through many stages of national development. So we were busy dealing with our domestic issues and how to find solutions to the social and political and economic conflicts. But now we need to explain to the outside about who we are and where we are going, and what will be the future of Korea and Asia, and for that matter, the world. So it is not surprising that many young people around the world are mesmerized by the BTS, 방탄소년단, or Parasite. And that itself is a testimony to the transformation of Korea from a poor and desperate country to a country of sending out messages on a global scale. Indeed, from outside, Korea is a successful country. Of course, inside, we have lots of problems and issues. Of course, in the National Assembly, we haven't even started to discuss our issues yet. And I was also, like my colleague Lee Sang-min, forcibly enlisted in the Foreign Affairs and Unification Committee. But overall, and I think that Korea is really, in a way, a unique country to send out all these good messages to outside, whether it's human rights or democracy or liberty, gender equality or environment or sports, international development or whatever. In fact, I'm very delighted today, and I told it to President Cho Gi-suk that I came here this morning to meet with all of you because during the last 8 years of my absence from politics, I was involved, I was engaged in public diplomacy myself through the small think tank that I have created called Asia Future Institute. 아시아 미래 연구원. And it was very rewarding for me to visit the countries in Asia, for example, the Vietnam or Indonesia, or Myanmar or Uzbekistan or Kazakhstan or Kyrgyzstan, and to meet with the young people through lectures and seminars and forums and talk shows. And they are all interested in Korea. And they want to know more about Korea. And they want to learn Korean language. And they think that all the boys in Korea look like BTS. So that's amazing. And I think that Korea is a country of attraction. Kind of, we have a magnetism, some kind of a cultural magnetism in our country. And a country of energy, and a country of constant news making, whether it's South Korea or North Korea. We tend to produce a lot of global news, including the recent experience of COVID-19 crisis, which has elevated Korea's position as one of the most advanced countries that has a effectively working medical system, and also people's voluntary contribution to coping with this crisis. And I think that in public diplomacy, according to my own experience, image is very important. Communication is also very important. But I think the most important thing is the contents of public diplomacy, what messages we would like to send out, and how we can manage to produce that message based on our own experience and get our messages across to the other side. And I think that it requires very special efforts and a very well-conceived strategy. And I think that Korean Association of Public Diplomacy is the best organization to make that effort. how to create contents about who we are, where we are going, what we are going to do, and how to get that message across to the other side. Very important. And I think that President Cho is the right person to lead this KAPD as the scholar in public diplomacy and the first scholar to teach public diplomacy in Korea and leading various researches on public diplomacy. So I really congratulate Professor Cho on taking a leading role of launching this KAPD. Let me talk about National Assembly. National Assembly as the organization to represent the people's will and people's opinion so that it can be reflected in the national policy through legislation and budget distribution. That's our job. But in a way, I think that National Assembly can also contribute to public diplomacy through parliamentary exchange, through political dialogue, and sometimes cultural events. I remember back in 2011 when Japan, for example, had a great earthquake and Fukushima virtually became a disaster of nuclear radiation. I asked my colleagues in the National Assembly, look, we always talk about cultural communication and good neighbor policy with Japan. 한일 우호 관계. We always talk about that. But what can we do to the historic disaster in our neighbor? Despite the fact that we have this territorial issue, history issue, trade issue, and these days even now security issue, but this is a humanitarian issue. So I think we should do something. So I wrote a letter to my colleagues in the National Assembly, and 2 members responded very positively from different political parties. I was from 한나라당, and the other was from 자유선진당, and also from 민주당. So immediately, 3 of us made a tripartisan delegation to Japan, to Fukushima, to visit the place and meet with the people and express our condolences on the great sacrifice the people made because of the disaster and try to encourage them to restore their stability. And then we came back to Tokyo after Fukushima and met with the Japanese politicians. At that time, Foreign Minister was Maehara from the Democratic Party with Mr. Nagashima, Mr. Hosono, and all the Japanese people. And we sat down and told them that we really express our deep condolences on the great damage and the sacrifice resulting from this disaster. And we said, we've been to the area we're coming down from Fukushima now. And then these Japanese politicians all just sat up straight and made a deep bow to us. And we were embarrassed. And they said, I'm sorry, we have not been to the area. But you came all the way from Korea and make that goodwill gesture. We are very impressed. So I think that this is, in a way, one of the examples of the public diplomacy that both the civilian organization and the public organization can produce. And I think that we should have some kind of a synergy between the two sides. I visit China from time to time. I'm teaching the students at Shandong University as an honorary professor. So I meet with the Chinese students twice a year. And like students in Indonesia, they want to know more about Korea, this students in Shandong University. It's very close to Korea. Takes only 45 minutes to reach Weihai from Incheon. So close. But we have some communication or contents or the shortages of information that they want to have. So when you talk about China, we talk about Beijing or Shanghai. That's natural. But I think that in order to have a very meaningful public diplomacy, we need to deal with the regions around Korea. For example, China is Shandong. For example, Japan is Fukuoka or Shizuoka. If it is Russia, it's Vladivostok. Rather than dealing with the centers of the country. So many visitations and communication with the capitals of the area. The United States, of course, DC, New York, LA, always we visit there, meet with the people. But what about the states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Texas, Florida, or Arizona? Not many people there even have a chance to meet with the people from Korea. So for them, it's very precious to meet with the Koreans and talk about Korea and try to understand Korea. And I think that's very important. So public diplomacy should not just only focus on the political center of the country, but the regions around. I think it's very important. So let me close my remarks. I would like to congratulate once again this very meaningful endeavor of creating this public diplomacy organization. And I wish that these activities of this organization can upgrade the public awareness of the importance of the public diplomacy. And together with my colleague, Representative Lee Sang-min, we will support this organization on a bipartisan manner in the National Assembly to produce much better image, communication, and contents for the peace and prosperity of the world. Thank you very much. 감사합니다. 네.
Thank you very much, the Honorable Dr. Park Jin. I think President Cho Ki-suk might be feeling that today we gained almost like 1,000 soldiers and 10,000 horses in the National Assembly across the ruling and opposition parties. Thank you very much. Now we are going to invite Ambassador Mikhail Reitra, who is the ambassador of the European Union to the Republic of Korea. Did you know that he was actually in 2018 was designated as ambassador of public diplomacy by Jungang Daily, as well as by the Corps of Honorary Consuls in Korea. I was really, I had no idea of the fact. But then when he actually stepped into the hall this morning, I immediately realized that it's quite natural for him to be designated as ambassador of public diplomacy. Why? Because he's wearing facial mask with the symbol of a European Union flag. Okay. Would you please welcome him with big hands, Ambassador?
Well, thank you very much for the invitation and the welcome. In the interest of understandability, I will not wear the mask. I'm engaged in public diplomacy as a diplomat, but also as an academic. I spent quite some time in studying that issue. And as it is good for public diplomacy not to give any advice to the host country, I thought I share with you some reflections on public diplomacy and you draw your own conclusions. Public diplomacy is a tool. It needs content. and it cannot replace content. Public diplomacy offers information about policies, interests, goals, and values, and it is part of soft power. Public diplomacy is not propaganda. The best propaganda is no propaganda. Public diplomacy is not a one-way street of information sharing. It is communication, which means a two-way street. Public diplomacy has become multitasking and comprises nowadays areas like classic political diplomacy, trade, economic and financial diplomacy, scientific and educational diplomacy, knowledge diplomacy, cyber diplomacy, digital diplomacy, sports diplomacy, and we could go on. Therefore, the actors of public diplomacy are not only diplomats, members of parliament, but also more and more the public at large. And I think, therefore, having an institution which takes care of the public at large, I think, is a very good initiative. Especially as public diplomacy has become even more important in times where communication and the dissemination of information has become essential in fighting COVID-19. In times where wrong information can threaten your health and life. In times where fake news threaten our values and democracy, for instance, through the meddling in elections, the beacon of our democracy. Public diplomacy is, like often in diplomacy, as much listening as it is talking. Listening in order to learn from other cultures, to understand, in order to be able to calibrate your information in order to be successful. Public diplomacy is the more challenging, and I turn for a moment to my case, when you have to present an idea, ideals, a value system, a way of life, a program, institutions, and not a specific country where you can build on its well-known characteristics, sites, stereotypes. You need not explain, if you are a national diplomat, that the Eiffel Tower is in Paris and Paris is the capital of France. You need not explain that the Brandenburger Tor is in Berlin and the White House is in Washington and people recognize the Sydney Opera. As a former president of the European Commission put it, you don't fall in love with a single market. Furthermore, in the case of the European Union, citizens often don't know and consequently don't appreciate that a public good is actually provided by the European Union. They realize it only when it is gone. The freedom of travel, one of the 4 pillars of the single market of the European Union, is a striking example. In the times of the lockdown and severe travel restrictions because of COVID-19, people suddenly understood and long for this freedom of traveling. So therefore, the European Union strives to resurrect traveling gradually and responsibly in a controlled manner. First, within the European Union, and secondly, since yesterday, as it was mentioned, also with close partners like Korea, which is profiting from, as Mr. Park called it, the elevated status. Public diplomacy needs adaptation to culture, to the habits of receiving information and accepting information. And when it comes to tools, it has nowadays to be interactive, like in the social media, and no longer just static, like the good old website. Public diplomacy has a strong verbal component, as language is not only a means of communication, but also transports culture. Therefore, in the European Union, we have 24 official languages. Nevertheless, non-verbal communication, music, films, dance, sculptures, paintings, porcelain, in short, artistic expressions of ideas, plays an essential role too. Non-verbal communication is not only complementing verbal communication, but it is also a field of public diplomacy in its own right. Public diplomacy should present an attractive content attractively and convincingly so that the offer is accepted. Then communication and not just passing of information can take place. And it should not be too long. Otherwise, you lose your audience. And therefore, I stop here. But I wish you insights, inspiration, and congratulate the Korean Association of Public Diplomacy on its inaugural conference. Public diplomacy is too important to be neglected. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you. All right, now we are going to have President of the Korea Foundation. The Korea Foundation is based on the Public Diplomacy Act enacted in 2016 as the official public diplomacy organization, comprehensive public diplomacy organization in our country. President Lee Gun, who is actually also a professor at the Graduate School of International Studies, Seoul National University, and I would say that he has been among the leading intellectual pioneers in the academic field of Korean public diplomacy. And he's also a good friend of mine. I'm not sure he still considers me as a friend after he took the job of president at the Korea Foundation. Anyhow, please welcome him, Dr. Lee, president of the Korea Foundation.
안녕하십니까. 국제교류재단의 이근입니다. Good morning, Professor Cho Gi-suk, President of the KAPD, the Honorable Lee Sang-min, and the Honorable Park Jin, I cannot see him right now, the members of the National Assembly of Korea, the Honorable Lee Tae-ho, Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of Korea, His Excellency Michael Mihail Reiterer, Ambassador of the European Union to Korea, Mr. Fan Kun, Minister, Counsel of the Embassy of the People's Republic of China to the Republic of Korea, Ambassador Han Chung-hee, members of the Korea Association for Public Diplomacy, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me begin by extending my sincere congratulations to the newly created Korean Association for Public Diplomacy. It was a long-time hope of many people to launch a network of public diplomacy academics and practitioners, and I'm very delighted to see that hope come to fruition today through this inaugural conference. I would like to convey my appreciation to President Cho Gi-suk and the founding members of the KAPD for their dedication and hard work in getting this association off the ground and in preparing for this gathering. As the president of a public diplomacy agency, the Korea Foundation, and also professor of international relations who has focused on research into soft power since the early 2000s, I always find it regrettable that only a handful of scholars and academic societies specialize in this field, with only a few case studies, some historical research, and government-funded policy analysis. I think we all agree that in the case of Korea, in particular, scholars and practitioners in public diplomacy expend too much energy on policy research focused primarily on the United States and Japan, and recently on China. And many of them, furthermore, cannot be considered public diplomacy studies, but general foreign policy studies, unfortunately. Additionally, the contents and direction of public diplomacy tend to change very rapidly with the change of the administrations. Of course, the USA and Japan are very important countries. China as well, very important. The European Union is also very important, but all the countries are important to Korea. There has been oversupply of inconsistent public diplomacy, while there has been undersupply of bipartisan, universal value-based public diplomacy. Because of this, I believe that the scholars and practitioners in the public diplomacy community need to theorize and sophisticate our public diplomacy studies beyond this narrow and inconsistent focus. For instance, in various countries and regions beyond the United States and Japan, and in a range of areas of culture, knowledge, and policy, let alone general bipartisan public diplomacy, as emphasized by Mr. Park Jin of the National Assembly. As our public diplomacy matures, our public diplomacy also needs to reflect upon Korea's changed standing in the international community. It is my humble thought that among many important research directions, the most urgent would be theoretical and empirical research into significant shift in Korean public diplomacy strategies, reflecting the change in the nation's position as an advanced democracy, as we move from a catching-up nation to an advanced and innovative democracy in the world. Next year marks the 30th anniversary of the establishment of the Korea Foundation. The Korea Foundation intends to declare year 2021 as the first year of a shift in this direction, moving toward public diplomacy of an advanced, innovative democracy focused more on future-oriented matters. In these circumstances, I'm confident that the Kapd will play a significant role in providing proper strategies, policy directions, and contents for the public diplomacy of Korea as a leading democracy in the international community. In closing, I would like to once again express my sincere gratitude to President Cho Gi-suk and the founding members of the Kapd. I deeply appreciate and respect your hard work and unwavering support. On behalf of the Korea Foundation, I sincerely hope that the Kapd can fulfill its mission through cooperative work and productive discussions between academics and practitioners. I wish you every success with today's conference and in the days ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President Professor Lee-geun. I mean, to my knowledge, he's always full of innovative ideas, and I realized that today is again no exception. Okay, we are going to invite Mr. Fan Kun, who is Minister Counselor of the Embassy of the People's Republic of China to Korea. Mr. Fan Kun will deliver congratulatory remarks in Korean, and then again I will make a very brief summary to you. Please. Would you please, give me a big hand.
안녕하세요. 제가 한국말로 하겠습니다. 사실 제가 한국말로 그 축사 드릴 수 있는 것도 한국 공공외교의 성과가 아닌가 생각합니다. 존경하는 조기수 회장님, 존경하는 이태호 차관님, 그리고 라이터리 대사님, 이근 이사장님, 내빈 여러분, 2020 한국공공외교학회 창립학술회의에 초대되어 매우 영광스럽게 생각합니다. 저는 중국 대사관을 대표하여 이번 회의가 성공적으로 개최된 것을 진심으로 축하드립니다. 최근 10년간 그 한국 외교의 중요한 내용 중에 하나인 공공외교는 지속적으로 혁신 발전해 오고 큰 성과를 거두었습니다. 특히 글로벌 무대에서 빛나고 있는 Kapd, 키무비에서부터 최근에 널리 찬사를 받고 있는 K-방역에 이르기까지 전 세계에서 엄청난 인기를 얻고 있는 한국 문화 그리고 한국 공공외교의 힘은 세계인들의 주목을 받고 있습니다. 축하드립니다. 그 최근 연간 한국 공공외교가 이렇게 빠르게 발전해 올 수 있는 이유는 그 정책 차원에서 충분한 중시와 문화 차원에서의 튼튼한 소프트웨어 기반 그리고 전 사회적 차원에서의 적극적인 동참이 있었기 때문이라고 생각합니다. 사실 저도 제 본인은 바로 한국 공공외교의 수혜자라고 할 수 있습니다. 그 우리 한국국제교류재단에서 그 코리아나라는 문화 홍보 잡지가 있죠. 1990년대 중반에 그 우리 한국국제교류재단과 그 중국사회과학원 그 협력해서 중국어판, 그 코리아나 중국판을 출版하기 시작했습니다. 그때 제가 대학교 4학년인데 그 잡지 번역에 참여할 수 있는 기회가 있었습니다. 이 덕분에 그 한국어를 더 많이 그 알게 되고 또 한국어 실력도 늘었죠. 뿐만 아니라 그때 외무고시 때 특히 면접 시험 때 그런 경험이 있기 때문에 아마 또 큰 도움이 되었습니다. 또 번역을 하면서 그 용돈도 받았죠 그때. 그리고 우리 중한 양국 관계에 있어서도 그 공공외교 분야의 협력도 매우 중요하다고 생각합니다. 지금 우리 한중 양국은 지리적으로 가깝고 경제적으로 융합되며 문화적으로 친근하고 감정적으로도 서로 통합니다. 또한 양국 간 오랜 교류의 역사를 가지고 있으며 많은 우호적인 미담도 대대적으로 전해지고 있습니다. 중한 수교 28년 이래 양국 관계는 눈부신 발전 성과를 거두었습니다. 그 정치적으로 상호 신뢰가 부단히 깊어지고 있으며 각 분야의 교류와 협력이 날로 긴밀해지고 있습니다. 중한 한중 간 연간 인적 왕래는 이미 1,000만 명 돌파했습니다. 우리 연간 교회도 3천억 달러 시대로 접어들었습니다. 코로나19 상황에 맞서 양국은 서로 도와주고 합동 방역 체제와 인적 왕래를 편리화하기 위한 신소 통로를 제일 먼저 설립 개통하여 각각 자국의 정령병 사태를 안정시키는 동시에 국제 무대에 모범을 세웠다고 말할 수 있습니다. 국가 간의 교류는 민간 교류의 친밀도에 달려 있다는 말이 있습니다. 앞으로 중한 한중 양국은 사회 각계 인사들의 공공외교 동참의 열의를 적극적으로 키우면서 양국 간 과학, 교육, 문화, 보건 등 분야에서의 교류와 협력을 계속 이어갈 수 있으면 합니다. 양국 간 정당, 지방, 언론, 학술, 민간 단체 간의 우호적 왕래를 확대하여 양국 국민들의 상호 이해를 촉진해서 중한 우호가 양국 국민들의 마음속에 뿌리 내리게 할 수 있으면 좋겠습니다. 중국은 한국과 함께 그 중한 한중 간의 이의, 책임, 운명 공동체를 만들어 중한 관계의 더욱 아름다운 내일을 맞이할 수 있도록 끊임없이 개척하고 함께 노력하기를 희망합니다. 다시 한번 한국공공외교학회의 창립을 축하하고 이번 학술회의 성공을 기원합니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fan Kun. I mean, I was really amazed that he's fluent Korean language. Well, he actually made 4 points. First point is that, among others, he highly appreciates the progress of Korean public diplomacy, which include not simply K-pop and K-movie, but also more recently, the Korea's response to coronavirus 19 crisis. Okay? The second point is that, I mean, he also see some success factors behind Korea's brilliant performance in the field of public diplomacy. What include great government policy, first of all, and second, very the cultural in-depth, deep cultural soft power, and then thirdly, but then lastly, civic participation. And the second point is that it's very interesting. He is saying that he himself is a beneficiary of Korean public diplomacy because back in 1990s, when he was a college student, he had a chance to participate in translating the magazine Koreana, published by Korea Foundation, of course, into Chinese, which actually helped greatly him not only learning Korean language, but also understanding Korean and eventually helping him pass the foreign servant recruitment exam. So in that sense, he is a great beneficiary of Korean public diplomacy. And the third point is that the Korea-China bilateral relations for the past 30 years since the establishment of diplomatic relationship has progressed greatly for the past 2 decades. For example, the people-to-people exchange reaching almost like 10 million. Is it correct? Yeah, 10 million, and the bilateral trade amount reaching 300 billion US dollars. Last but not least, his final point is that quoting the saying that the interstate interstate exchange relationship greatly depends on people-to-people exchanges. In that, context, he would like to really hope and see the bilateral relationship between the two countries widen and deepen in a variety of fields like science, education, culture, even health, public health. Okay, and also the interstate cooperation over in the field of political parties, subnational governments, media and journalism, and of course, academia. Once again, my deepest congratulations on the launching of a Korean Association for Public Diplomacy. Thank you. All right, last but not least, we have Mr. Han Chung-hee, who is former ambassador and foreign policy advisor to the Speaker of the Korean National Assembly. I have to say this. I mean, I have a very personalized memory and impression of Ambassador Han Chung-hee. That I think is back in early 2010 when he was serving as Director General of Cultural Affairs. At the time, I mean, now we have the Bureau of Public Diplomacy and Cultural Affairs, but then at that time the title was the Bureau of Cultural Affairs at Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He actually, that's what, in the early 2010s, I mean, he was at the forefront of Korean public diplomacy as a field commander. But my impression is that he's not wild and tough. He's very gentle, intellectual, resourceful, but at the same time, very firm field commander of Korean public diplomacy. So, Ambassador Han, would you please come up to the podium?
Congratulations on inaugural conference of the Korean Association for Public Diplomacy. As you heard, I have been working on public diplomacy in its founding stage from 2012 to 2014 in the Foreign Ministry as a Director for Cultural Affairs. I'm very pleased and even moved today. Thank you, Professor Jo Gi-suk, for your invitation. Professor Jo mentioned she and I worked together to open Public Diplomacy Center in Ewha Women's University. I think the first and the still only public diplomacy research center in Korea, I believe. As I'm the last speaker in the opening session, I'd like to suggest 5 substantive policy points based on my experience on which direction the Korean public diplomacy should take. Number 1, Korea should play a more active and constructive role on the issues surrounding the Korean Peninsula and make efforts to converge and narrow down the different perceptions of the regional powers in this regard. Traditional hard power approach has been largely shifted to the soft power one. The reputation, image, and perception of the regional leaders, senior officials, parliament, media, and think tank play an important role in shaping that country's foreign policy toward the Korean Peninsula. Next generation Korean American and the United States can also play a bridging role between Seoul and Washington. In almost all major issues in Northeast Asia, such as North Korean nuclear issue, US-China relations, US-North Korea relations, and Korea-Japan relations, and Korea-China relations, perception matters. Therefore, public diplomacy, I believe, is critical in dealing with the geostrategic change in the region. Republic of Korea should continue to explain that the Republic of Korea is the direct party to North Korea related and Korea Peninsula related issues. During my service as a Deputy Permanent Representative to the United Nations, Republic of Korea participated and spoke in all UN Security Council meetings on North Korea. As they say that the future of Syria is determined by the Syrian people, we can say that the future of the Korean Peninsula should be decided by the free will of all Korean people. I believe which is a very important principle as well as a desirable perception in the region. 2, we need to share our stories and narratives on a full-fledged democracy, open society, and economic success with developing countries without any condition. Korea's strength is a free and liberal democracy and market economy and open society that respects universal values like human dignity, human rights, and rule of law. Korea's Corona-19 response demonstrates an excellent national health system with good and open governance, advanced technology, and innovative entrepreneurship, together with a sense of community. Korea will continue to tell people in the world the importance of open and inclusive institutions, good governance, and rule of law. 3, Republic of Korea should be perceived as one of the leading countries in advancing global values. Korea should and will continue to engage and speak up on global issues such as the pandemic response, multilateralism, sustaining peace, sustainable development goals, climate change, human rights, and global citizenship. Korea should be perceived as an active player for a more peaceful, tolerant, just, and inclusive world, as already proven in many different global initiatives like G20 and Nuclear Security Summit. 4, the next generation of young people in Northeast Asia must be closer, friendlier, and more intimate through diverse exchanges and meetings. Youth exchanges, study abroad, and any meetings of the young people, even through social media, should be encouraged. Through peer group meetings, they can revisit the stereotype or bias that the old generation has and rewrite with their own perception, which can contribute to a future-oriented relationship, as you see in Seoul-Tokyo relations. Education for global citizenship, which learns mutual respect and understanding and tolerance based on human dignity, is the ultimate way for international peace and living together. Global citizenship is all the more important with Corona-19 as people tend to deepen exclusion, segregation, and xenophobia. 5, we can take 홍익인간 and good and positive influence. 홍익인간 and good and positive influence as 2 nation brand objectives that Korea should pursue. 홍익인간 aims from our old kingdom, aims edifying people equipped with hearts and minds benefiting to every people and nations around the world. Good and positive influence is meant to be a Korea that foreign people voluntarily enjoy Korean cultures and work together for Korea's value-driven policy and initiatives. And Korea in turn responds a positive feedback in a reciprocal way so that a virtuous circle or win-win can be generating. In conclusion, I think 3 waves can explain public diplomacy of Korea. The first wave is that people in the world like Korea. We can say Korea matters. The second wave is an enlargement to other interest areas such as traditional culture, language, food, taekwondo, or even foreign policy. We can say all that Korea. Third wave is caring, sharing, serving, and having empathy and compassion one another with the 홍익인간 and good influence. You can say the world loves Korea and Korea loves the world. This circular rather than one-sided public diplomacy should be the ultimate goal of Korean public diplomacy. I hope that the Korean Association for Public Diplomacy could play a central role to achieve those important and solemn goals in the future. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Han Chung-hee. Now, I should say that it's time to adjourn the opening session, and immediately we're going to have a group photo session for those people who take part in the keynote session. Would you please come forward to the podium to take a picture? But then please bring your mask. Facial. We're gonna have 2 cuts. One with mask, one another without mask. Please come forward. 자, 여러분, 자, 여러분, so we're gonna have immediately. We are going to have keynote session. So would you please take your seats so that we could start the keynote session right away. We are quite behind the schedule. So for keynote session, we are going to two presentations. The first one will be by Professor Lee Byung-jung, who is also Vice President of the Korean Association for Public Diplomacy, who will make a presentation on the topic of Korean public diplomacy, past, present, and future, which will be followed by President Cho Gi-suk's presentation on the topic of a theoretical model on effective public diplomacy. Please do understand, because we are behind the schedule, I cannot give you 20 minutes maximum per presentation, okay? So Professor Lee Byung-jung, would you please come first? Please give him a big hand.
네, 안녕하세요. 저도 한국말을 잘하는데 또 외교부에서 이 오전 세션은 영어로 진행을 부탁을 하셔서 영어로 하겠습니다. Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you all. My name is Lee Byung-jung from Sungmyeong Women's University. I am very honored to be the first presenter of this inaugural conference. And I'm very happy, honestly, to see so many faces, real faces, for the first time in many months, actually. Other than my family members' faces, I get to see your face in person. That's very good news for today. I'm also very happy in many ways. First of all, to be the first presenter, to congratulate this launching of this organization. And I feel like I'm attending a wedding ceremony, actually. It's because we have a kind of marriage today between academics and practitioners. This is a very rare moment that these two groups of people get together So we have people from Foreign Ministry and Korea Foundation, and also scholars from many different universities. I'm also happy. I also feel like I'm attending a wedding ceremony because it's also a marriage between two major disciplines in the study of public diplomacy. As we all know, the one area is, of course, international relation and political scientists who study this from their own point of view. The second group is, of course, the communication scholars like me. And again, for the first time, these two groups of scholars get together to discuss this matter today. And for that reason, I think it's a very, very meaningful and remarkable event. And before I start my presentation, again, my deepest gratitude to Professor Cho Gi-suk for making this possible in such a short time. We worked for this for only for 2 or 3 months, and we were able to have this great gathering. And it wouldn't have been possible without Professor Cho's hard work and dedication. And as we all know, Korean women are all superwomen, and she is the living example of these Korean superwomen. All right, without further ado, my presentation, I have only 20 minutes, and I've looked at Professor Cho's presentation, which is very, very academic, with a lot of concepts and everything, but mine will be half academic and half practical. Having this background as a journalist in the past, working for foreign media, I'll use that experience as a journalist for half of my presentation, and the other half would be hopefully more academic and theoretical. I'm supposed to talk about the past, present, and the future of public diplomacy. I'll try my best. Okay, I have only one slide to show, so it's not going to be that complicated for you. And here, I think it's very meaningful that we have this gathering and conference, particularly now, because as many of today's guest speakers mentioned, Korea is at a very critical moment in terms of public diplomacy. I think for the first time in, I guess, Korea's history, we receive so much attention from the global community, global media, and foreign leaders because of this particularly coronavirus situation, the way we handled very successfully to contain the spread of the virus, and it's receiving a lot of praises from all over the world. I should mention this because it's so important before I talk about the past and present. I think the living example of how we were able to receive global attention in a positive way was the fact recently that US President Trump invited Korea to join the G7 meeting in September, if it happens in Washington. And I don't know whether it will happen or not, but just the fact that he invited Korea to join this group of rich countries, advanced countries, means something. That means Korea's status in the world has been elevated, as you have mentioned, so much over the past few months. So now we are in par with other leading nations like the US and UK, particularly because those nations in the Western advanced societies, the way they handled coronavirus pandemic was so different from ours, and it was a big contrast. Our success and their failure that made our achievement so remarkable, and that was the reason why we had so much success. I've seen some officials from the foreign ministry here, and particularly in our class, we did a little study on the way the foreign ministry tried to promote our handling of the coronavirus. One example was the trust campaign. I'm sure some of you are familiar with this campaign by the foreign ministry to promote our way of handling the virus. And a lot of countries in the world are trying to emulate that case. I believe. But yes, we are receiving all those praises and attention at the moment, but as we all know, international environment is very, very precarious at the moment. People talk about a new Cold War, particularly between the US and China. So yesterday's compliment for us can turn into today's and tomorrow's criticism, depending upon how the pandemic situation unfolds. Korea can lose all the acclaims it gained recently, and with the emerging of a new Cold War caused mainly by growing hostilities between the US and China, international relations are increasingly becoming uncertain. Although I'm supposed to talk about the future, it's really up in the air. We don't even be able to forecast 6 months from now the way this virus will unfold and the way we will react to that. So I'll very much focus on the past and present, so that we can have some ideas on how the future will look like for Korea's public diplomacy. Incidentally, I did a study recently on Korea's 70 years of public diplomacy history. To be honest, we have Dr. Kim Tae-hwan from the Korea Diplomatic Academy, and I got a lot of ideas, borrowed a lot of ideas from his work, I confess here. In short, can I have the next page, please? Oh, I do that myself. Okay. All right, here. Okay. All right. This is a summary of the study I did recently. Unfortunately, Professor Cho asked me to focus on the past 10 years, but without looking at the whole entire 70 years of Korea's history in public diplomacy, we cannot analyze the past 10 years. So I give you the whole 70 years. And Assemblyman Park Jin talked about the importance of messaging, sending messages in public diplomacy. So I kind of summarized the 6 key messages Korea tried to send to the world over the past 70 years. Okay, I hope you can all see it clearly. Starting from the 1948, the foundation of the modern Korea. The first period from 48 to 60, I would call it the key message of that time was nation building. Of course, right after we were created, the country was created. That was the message we sent to the whole world, particularly US and allies, our security allies. And at that time, according to my analysis, our communication for public diplomacy was very preliminary, very primitive, of course, very crude form of communication, mainly using human context and interpersonal communication. I'm moving on to the second stage, from 60 to 72. I would call this period the age of legitimacy competition between, again, South Korea and North Korea, and we were trying to be recognized by the whole world. At that time, surprisingly, North Korea was in many ways stronger and more famous than South Korea, economically, militarily, and all that. And we had to change all that perception from the global community. So we focused also very much on Western world. Basic publications was our main communication mode, like newsletters and newspapers. Third period, from 70 to 88, that time our message was economic development, of course. We were able to achieve some degree of development, and 88, of course, was the year of Seoul Olympics, and we used that moment to showcase our newfound prosperity. Print media like newspapers, international newspapers like the New York Times or Newsweek, which I used to work for as a journalist, those media was primarily used during this time. You can take a look at other factors affecting those strategies and messages of Korea's public diplomacy. I analyzed both domestic and international factors affecting our change. Fourth period is from 88 to 98. It was political democracy, as we all know. And we began to expand our target audiences, not only West, but the East and China and other socialist countries. Broadcasting media, BBC, CNN, we began to do advertising on those international broadcasting media. Fifth period is dynamic Korea, I would call it. This is the time when we had the FIFA World Cup, and Korea Image Promotion Committee was created by the government, and the message was, of course, dynamic Korea. The key point was the cultural aspect of Korea, K-pop particularly, and K-movies and all that. And we began to use more advanced media for those communication. First generation digital media like newsletter, emails and homepages and so on. Final period up until today, I said 2018, but actually it applies to even today. I would call this period the message Global Korea. This was promoted by one administration, but I think the following administrations carry out this message of Global Korea, which focuses very much on multilateralism. We are moving from bilateralism to multilateralism and trying to play a more important, influential role in the global community, caring not just about our domestic national interests, but more on global issues as a very respected middle power country, of course. And the media mode at that time has further developed to include two-way social media, SNS, and all that. And I would call this 10 years period the period of public diplomacy formation, infrastructure formation. As we learned from our previous guests, this time, with this catchphrase of Global Korea, we participated in global affairs, G20 Summit, the Nuclear Security Summit, and other global events where we try to set the agenda and also frame discourses. You're not just following other people's agenda. So it was a big departure from old, very much security-focused bilateral diplomacy. And year 2010 was designated as the first year for public diplomacy, and public diplomacy ambassadorship was created, and the foreign ministry was officially mandated to handle the job with the enactment of the Public Diplomacy Act in 2016, and the current government carries out that mandate, and we have, so again, as seen in these 70 years of history, Korea's public diplomacy has evolved, has developed very slowly but surely, from very, again, primitive one-way message dissemination to more two-way engagement and relationship cultivation. More recently, now we have culture, knowledge, and policy as three major pillars of Korea's public diplomacy. And the way I interpret this three pillars, we want to be loved. We want foreigners to love about Korea through culture. We want them to know about Korea through knowledge. We want them to support Korea through policy. So these three pillars have all these interpretations, my opinion. So now we have facing the current stage of public diplomacy. We try to become responsible and respected middle power, ODA, PKO, KOICA. Those are some of the issues we are trying to use for that purpose. Environment, e-government, all these global issues, we try to be a part of a solution for those problems. And we have also evolved very much into more relational public diplomacy, very different from the previous informational advocacy diplomacy. So this is where we try to play some responsible role in the in the international community. I can give you an example. I was able to last year to review some of the cases, public diplomacy cases carried out by Korea's central government as well as foreign ministry. One example was done in Jakarta, Indonesia, and I think it received a big prize from the foreign ministry as an excellent PD case. It was a cross-country outreach program by the embassy in Jakarta. They traveled like 5 days, 6 days for 1,000 kilometers in a bus. They rode, the ambassador and other staff members rode a bus and traveled whole Indonesia to interact and engage and build relationship and listen to local people. So, and more recently, our current status focuses on helping other countries through the collaborative public diplomacy. We are trying to work with many different countries. The foreign ministry is at the forefront of this effort, trying to connect with other countries and international organizations, WHO. Of course, I mean, its existence is questioned by the US and many countries, but still we are trying to work multilaterally with these organizations. Yet, I should, I know don't have much time, but I can finish with some caution. Although we focus very much on very relational, very engaging, inclusive public diplomacy, we still practice old style, more or less propaganda, not propaganda, Cold War style confrontational public diplomacy. The example I can give you is our exchange of all those rhetorics with Japan last year and this year for historical and trade and territorial issues. And this happens even now. So we are not doing all the good, positive, contributing public diplomacy. We also engage in very harsh, rather confrontational public diplomacy at the same time. And this is a trend in the world, not just in Korea. The Trump's, America First, Brexit, and all this, the revival of nationalism and populism is a big danger for public diplomacy in the world. And we are facing the same risks and dangers. So that is why I think, so let me just read some of this. This public diplomacy is based on the growing importance of public and public opinion and media-related public opinion. Yes, it's all good for the democratization of diplomacy, but too much democratization sometimes also poses dangers. Politicization, I think somebody mentioned that today, politicization of diplomacy can be risky at times. Sometimes it's better to be handled by experts, professional career diplomats for some issues. So there's that danger everywhere, but particularly in Korea. So I would think that will be a challenge. How can we make our public diplomacy more apolitical, more neutral, so that even if we have a new government, every 5 years we have a new government, and the problem, a lot of foreign diplomats complain that Korean diplomacy, public diplomacy too, changes overnight, like flip-flop all the time. So that's the criticism we get, and how can we prevent that kind of policy change, policy interruptions, and I think the creation of this kind of civil organization, like our association today, will be very important in managing this kind of, in helping depoliticize our diplomacy and public diplomacy. So for that reason, I think this organization particularly has to remain neutral and try to be objective. No matter what kind of, regardless of what kind of government comes in, we can carry out the same consistent and coherent public diplomacy studies and policy suggestions for the coming administrations. Okay, so again, for that reason, I'm very positive that the future will look better, and because we've evolved and developed continuously, I think this trend will continue if we do, heed these kind of warnings and dangers. All right, that's all I have for today. Thank you for listening. And if you have time, maybe later you can give me some feedback and questions, and I would very appreciate that. Thank you again very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Lee Byung-jung, for your punctuality. Well, now, last but not least, we have President Cho's presentation. Can I ask you to make it in like 15 minutes?
Good morning again. And my paper in Korean, the titled like 공공외교의 이론화를 위하여, searching for a theory in public diplomacy. And I just decided to present a theoretical model on effective public diplomacy. What's the purpose of this association? And if you ask me like that, then I would say to create theories that can be applied to practices in the field, not the body of knowledge we pursued in discipline. I think PD is a field, not an academic discipline. And in academic field, what do we pursue? The practical knowledge. So our goal is to develop theories that can be applied in the field. So I'm going to first show the current status of PD research in Korean academia. I searched for all the PD literature since 2003 because that was marked as the first PD publication. And secondly, I'm going to talk about the problems lies in soft power conceptualization that the President Egan have pursued so far. And thirdly, I will present my model. And fourthly, let me briefly summarize just the preliminary outcome because I conducted a research on 9 country cases: Korea, US, China, Russia, Japan, Germany, UK, France, and Sweden. So just preliminary research outcome. And I'm going to talk about finally the implications for Korea. What can we learn from these 9 country cases? Okay. And these are the number of PD publications in Korea since 2002 up to today. And it is interesting to note that the publication, 이게 안 되냐? 이거 안 싸지는데? As you can see, publication exponentially increases up to 2014. And 이쪽을 향해서 쏘라고? 아니 이건 되는데 라이트 포인터가 안 돼. 포인터가 안 돼. Okay. So as you can see, it exponentially increases up to 2014 and then decreases and almost dropped in 2018 and then recovered to the level of 2014 in 2019. And what does this tell us? This is just my hunch and what happened. What do you think happened in 2014? I haven't conducted any serious research yet, but this is just my guess that 2014, we all remember it was sunken Seoul ferry. And afterwards, the scholars were not motivated to conduct any research on public diplomacy because our image was tainted and ruined already. So what? How are we going to make any difference by studying and publishing public diplomacy literature? That's my sense. And then why it came back dramatically in 2019, democratic government and scholars are motivated to conduct research because we are now living in a democracy and public diplomacy can make a difference. And these are the frequency of publication by PD policy area. And as you can see, most of the research was conducted in policy diplomacy. And next is knowledge diplomacy. And knowledge diplomacy includes language, science and technology. And cultural diplomacy is the next. It was not, it was not knowledge diplomacy. What is it? Legal. And actually the second most was the legal and institutional studies because policy scientists conducted a lot of research in this area. And the other area is comparatively less. And this is the frequency of publication by PD academic field. And it resembles the trend of the PD policy area. It's very similar. So predominantly the research was conducted by political scientists and social scientists. And still, we have very little literature in communications and public relations, but the trend is not the same in the US. Most of the PD research has been conducted by communication scholars. So I think we should encourage communication scholars more to conduct research. And this is the frequency of publication by methodological approach. And you can see predominantly descriptive studies, case studies, historical studies predominate the other areas. And particularly, there are some conceptual studies, but very little comparative study or empirical studies. So we have to encourage more in the least studied methodologies. Then, in theorizing PD, I think we should overcome this conceptualization debate of soft power because soft power has been the key concept in public diplomacy due to Joseph Nye. And Nye defined soft power in 3 different words. Its cultural resources and political values and its foreign policies. And the problems that I find from Nye's conception is that the variables at the 3 different levels are confused. So for example, diplomatic outcome is not separated from soft power resources and political system. They are all mentioned in the same dimension. And secondly, because of this overemphasis on soft power, it projects an illusion that successful PD can increase the magnitude of soft power. But it seldom happens, right? It seldom happens. So if not, many believe that PD is regarded as a failure. So in fact, it happened in many countries after pouring thousands of dollars in PD and they didn't find any increase in soft power, so they cut the budget in PD. It's of no use. So we should not give that kind of illusion to the public officials. And third, the dependent variables and independent variables are tautologically intertwined. That means soft power is a dependent variable. So for example, above, foreign policy, I think is a dependent variable. And the culture and values are the independent variable. So in Nye's conceptualization, dependent variable and independent variable coexist. That means this soft power does not explain anything, right? So in order to overcome this, I created this model to distinguish between soft power inherited from the history, past history, and soft power that can be increased or enlarged by the success of the public diplomacy. So the past history actually shapes not only the magnitude of soft power, but also that of hard power. And actually, many includes some hard power elements in defining soft power. But if we do that, then we cannot analyze. So I want to separate between hard power and soft power so that we can analyze. And I discovered that these two are interacting, but asymmetrically. And hard power influences the magnitude of soft power to a great extent, but not vice versa. And then these hard power and soft power affect many variables within the political system. And these political system variables are influenced by external shocks, such as COVID pandemic, or communication, technological innovation, and etc. So within the political system, I hypothesized these 5 variables that might affect the outcome of the PD. And those are ideas, institutions, governance, leadership, and communication system. And you might be questioned why you separate between governance and communication system. Because I think these two can be distinguishable, because Japan has a democratic governance on its surface, but their communication system is very much closed. So as we have witnessed the crisis during the Fukushima nuclear power plant explosion, their closed communication system really ruined their country's image, and their branding dropped very much. So here again, I want to emphasize the ideas. We always talk about ideas, but these ideas are actually inherit from our ancestors. And these ideas, when it operates well in the political system, it affects PD. The fact that we have great ideas from our ancestors doesn't really matter. So in that sense, we have to separate the two different concepts of ideas. And then to assess the success of the PD, I try to use the effectiveness measure. Although it will be, finally, we will employ perception analysis to measure the effectiveness. So in order to measure that, I separated PD input, output, and outcome. And the final impact will feedback not only PD input, but also the soft power. So most of the soft power is inherited from the past history, but a little bit of marginal magnitude of soft power will be influenced by the outcome of the PD. So using this model, let me just briefly mention why historical context is so much important. Because if you look at the measurement of soft power, it's not free from our past experience and the particularly during the imperial period. So diplomatic relations is already set by past history. So one typical example is Japan. Without their sincere apology, China and Korea will never have, Japan cannot enlarge soft power among Koreans and Chinese. So in order not to give an illusion that the successful PD can enlarge soft power, we have to separate the soft power inheritance from soft power that we can make a difference. And effective PD could be influenced by the political system, not only by MOFA, but also by all these factors. So I will skip. And so PD policy effectiveness, input, output, outcome, I was inspired by the PR assessment tool, but the contents are different. So as the Vice Minister Iteo mentioned, the budget organization personnel is the basic input, and output are the PD programs and activities, and outcome is the outcome and impact, and we can measure outcome in 3 dimensions: affective, cognitive, and normative dimension. And there are mediating variables. 2 mediating variables are host countries' public perception and the non-state actors in civil society. Every country has their very unique non-state actors. So for example, Japan and Germany, they have foundations which are very active in PD, far from the government. And in the US, they have Hollywood and really pop cultural community, which is always anti-government when the Republican president is in power. And so the reason that then how do we measure what are the factors that affect this host country's public? And I think the materialist versus post-materialist, the classification can help us to understand the nature of the public in the host countries. So for example, China is very popular in African countries, but very unpopular in European countries. And why? It depends on the nature of the public in those countries. And African countries are still very much materialistic, and they love money. They love huge investment by China. But in European countries, if the country is autocratic, not democratic, then they hate it. So the China, why? Because most of the European publics are very much post-materialistic. They're very much value-oriented. They emphasize human rights and democracy. So feedback, as I already mentioned, is very much important. And through this feedback, I think we can enlarge the marginal magnitude of the soft power. Then what's the preliminary research outcome? And first, the most important factor was ideas and values. But not only if they have long tradition of these ideas and values, because it's credible, so they are likely to be successful. And the examples are US, UK, France over China, Russia, Korea. We have short history, that's why still we have, some way to go. And so success is determined by the consistency between ideas inherited and operating in the system. So that's why Barack Obama and Tony Blair and Angela Merkel were successful. However, when there was a discrepancy between ideas inherited and operating in the system, as we witnessed during George Bush administration and Donald Trump, and their country image, plummeted. So that's the first outcome. And second research outcome is that the next important factors were governance and communication system. So still Japan is more successful than China or Russia in terms of democratic governance. But in communication system, Korea's COVID-19 was more successful than Japanese COVID management, and also the Japanese Fukushima nuclear power plant explosion. And in case of Korea, sunken cruise ship in Budapest was much more well dealt by the government than sunken Sewol ferry. So within Korea, in the same society, depending on their communication, the government's communication system, we got 2 different results. And the last outcome that I like to share is I hypothesized these 2 factors, whether they can affect the PD, but these were less relevant or even irrelevant. And for example, I was interested in this whether presidential system or parliamentary system, which one is more conducive to successful PD? And no difference, because the parliamentary country like UK or Germany was successful, as much successful as US, the presidential system. And the another was leadership. Who initiated this PD policy? Does it make any difference in terms of success? And I couldn't find any difference, because the top leaders, when top leaders initiated PD policy, like Tony Blair of UK and Junichiro Koizumi of Japan, both were successful. And also, when George Bush initiated new PD during his term, but he failed, and Lee Myung-bak, he even created the National Brand Committee. He failed, and it was dissolved after his term. And Putin, you witnessed, how much money he poured in Sochi Olympic, but it was a total failure. So it didn't matter. Some countries were successful, and some countries were failing. So, and what about Minister of Foreign Affairs initiate this new PD policy? In case of Germany, the Minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier, he initiated, but Germany was also successful, so it doesn't matter. And what about high-level public officials? It's very interesting. When Japan initiated PD at the beginning in 1970s, public officials, high-level public officials initiated, just like in Korea. So, which level, at which level initiates the public diplomacy policy, it didn't affect the success or failure. Okay, then conclusion. Am I on the right track in terms of time? Final conclusion, okay? Then what do we learn from these 9 case studies? And the National Assemblyman Park Jin mentioned very important thing, and he said that we should ask us who we are and where we are heading toward, and what is our vision for Korea and Asia. And I think we should ask this very seriously. So we should ask who we are, because we have to define our values. And particularly when we define our values from our tradition, we are likely to be successful, because it saves our time and energy to build consensus among the people. So in order to build bipartisan consensus on our identity, it will be effective if we search it from our traditional values. And Mr. Han Chung-hee mentioned 홍익인간, and actually this 홍익인간 comes from 경천애인. And this goes back to our Dangun myth and also Joseon dynasty. So we have long tradition of this. And this 경천애인 means we love nature, meaning peace and harmony and people. So the COVID-19 management was successful because the current administration focused on people and people's lives. And also our modernization and democratization, I think this is the time to shake hands between modernization bloc and democratization bloc and acknowledge each other's contribution and accomplishments for the nation. And these all benefited our people economically and politically, right? And next, these values should permeate in every area of the policy. Policy diplomacy, knowledge diplomacy, and cultural diplomacy. These values should be, penetrated. And thirdly, we have to make tailor-made messages to the target audiences in host countries, because who we are will be determined by how they perceive us, right? And as I told you earlier, this materialist versus post-materialist is just one example, but unless we understand their culture and their history, unless we find common commonalities between their history and our history, we are not successful in persuading them. So the tailor-made message is very much important. And finally, this is, I think, the most important thing. That means there exists priority in terms of policy area. And MOFA, particularly the Department of this Public Diplomacy and Culture, they are pouring a lot of efforts in cultural diplomacy and knowledge diplomacy and policy diplomacy. But something happens like Sewol Ferry accident, that ruins the whole endeavor of no use. So what I'm trying to say that there is a priority. That means what is the most important one? That is foreign policy and domestic policy. So the best foreign policy and domestic policy is the best PD, just like best PR is the best policy, right? Best policy is the best PR. So we should not forget this. So when PD fails because of the government, don't blame MOFA, blame the top leadership, right? So if we separate all variables like this, then I think we will be able to conduct more analytic analysis, comparative analysis, and empirical analysis. And I hope you will join me in advancing and developing this model further. Thank you very much for your listening.
Well, thank you very much, Professor this time, as a scholar, Professor Cho Gi-suk. And I'm really sorry to have a designated time for Q&A for this session, but then I hope we could have some time for afternoon sessions. So we are going to close the morning session entirely, and then we're going to get started with the luncheon. Luncheon will be right at this place. Okay. Please be seated as you are, and the meal will be served right at this place. Thank you very much.